Welcome to Midnight Confessions, where the darkest truths come alive after sunset. Tonight, 3 security officers confess their most horrifying parking lot encounters. A psychopath with a hunting knife who wouldn't stop advancing. A missing woman's body that sat unnoticed for 3 months, while thousands parked beside her. And a predator who appeared 6 inches away the second before a car door opened. These confessions will change how you walk to your car forever. Story 1. Years ago, when I was barely out of my teens, I worked nights as an armed security officer to fund my college education. The shifts were brutal, 7 p.m. until 3 in the morning, and exhaustion was my constant companion. One particular evening, after my shift ended, I made plans to drive to a neighboring town to see a buddy of mine. I thought I'd pick up a drink for him as a courtesy gift. Can't even remember what brand now. But what unfolded in that desolate parking lot? That's seared into my brain forever. My workday had ended, and like an idiot, I was too drained to follow proper safety procedures. Company policy required me to secure my service weapon, belt, and holster in my trunk. Instead, I carelessly threw everything onto my back seat. That lazy decision would end up saving someone's life. Maybe even mine. My neighborhood wasn't exactly safe, and there was this grimy little shop in a run-down strip plaza. The streetlight above flickered weakly, casting eerie dancing shadows across the cracked pavement below. It was roughly 3:30 in the morning. The lot sat nearly abandoned. Just a handful of vehicles scattered under that sickly orange glow. I parked near the entrance, grabbed my drink, and headed back toward my sedan. That's when I spotted her. She came stumbling from the direction of some abandoned medical offices at the far end of the lot. She looked about my age, maybe early 20s, with blonde hair falling to her shoulders, and wearing a white blouse decorated with tiny pink flowers. Her eyes were wild with terror, and she clutched something tightly in her trembling hand. My first thought? Gun, my heart launched into my throat. "Oh God," I whispered, freezing beside my vehicle. "He's coming after me," she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation as our eyes locked. She rushed toward me, practically falling over her own feet in panic. "He's coming after me!" she screamed again. Then I heard it, a sharp crackling click, not a firearm, a stun gun. The electrical weapon sparked and sizzled as she waved it frantically in the air, her entire body shaking. "He's coming after me," she sobbed, her voice breaking completely. I yanked my car door open, forcing myself to stay calm. "Who's chasing you?" I demanded, scanning the darkness. The silence was suffocating, the kind that makes your eardrums throb with pressure. Then, emerging from the exact same corner she'd fled from, I saw him. This guy was massive, had to be 6'5" at least, completely bald, wearing a sleeveless blue tank that exposed arms like tree trunks. In his right fist, catching the dying streetlight, was a blade, not some pocket knife. This was a massive hunting knife, the kind designed to field dress large game. "That's my girl," he growled, his voice disturbingly calm, eyes locked onto the terrified woman. He didn't even acknowledge my existence, just kept advancing across the asphalt, boots scraping menacingly with each step. I glanced at the woman, now standing just feet from my vehicle, gripping that stun gun like it was her only hope in this world. "Is this guy with you, or is he actually stalking you?" I asked, trying to make sense of the nightmare unfolding before me. For all I knew, they could have been running from someone else together. But she shook her head violently, voice trembling. "He's stalking me!" "Get inside the store," I commanded, pointing toward the convenience shop entrance about 20 feet away. "Tell them to dial 911 immediately." This was long before I owned a cell phone, about 7 years before. Actually, so the store was her only option. She nodded frantically and bolted toward the entrance, shoes slapping against concrete. The massive man kept approaching, repeating his disturbing mantra. "That's my girl." His knife remained raised. He was closing the gap now, maybe 15 feet separating us, his distorted shadow stretching impossibly long beneath the flickering streetlight. I reached into my back seat, grabbed my duty belt, and strapped it on quickly, deliberately turning my hip so he could clearly see my holstered weapon. My palm rested on the grip of my 9mm, silently praying he'd back down. He didn't. He kept advancing, chanting those same disturbing words, "That's my girl." My pulse hammered in my skull, but I'd trained for situations like this. I'd served in Army infantry, seen actual combat overseas, learned how to maintain composure when death came knocking. Still, something about this felt wrong, senseless, almost surreal, playing out in this filthy parking lot in the dead of night. He was close now, maybe 10 feet. That hunting knife looked even more vicious up close. The blade had to be 8 inches long. I drew my pistol, aimed center mass at his chest, and said firmly, "Here's my piece." He stopped, but the knife stayed up. His eyes narrowed dangerously, boring into mine, that blade still gleaming wickedly in his massive hand. The entire parking lot seemed to shrink until it was just us two, the tension so thick it felt like breathing through wet concrete. "How about you turn around and walk away? Have yourself a pleasant evening," I said, keeping my voice steady. Though internally I was thinking, Christ, he's going to force me to pull this trigger. I didn't want that. I'd witnessed enough death in combat to know I didn't need that weight on my conscience, especially not over some insane parking lot. Confrontation. I thumbed the hammer back on my pistol, the metallic click, slicing through the oppressive silence, and repeated more forcefully, "Walk away, now, have a good night." For several agonizing seconds he didn't move, just stared, knife still raised in his massive fist. Then, finally, he took one step backward. "Sorry, man," he said, his tone suddenly softer. "Thought you were somebody else." He lowered the blade, tucking it into his waistband, and began backing away, toward the same store the terrified woman had fled into moments earlier. I kept my weapon trained on him until he turned and disappeared through the glass doors. Only then did I exhale shakily, my hands trembling slightly as I holstered my gun. I climbed into my car. The bottle of soda still sat untouched on my passenger seat. Across the parking lot, diagonally opposite from where everything had just happened, sat another 24-hour shop with a sheriff's cruiser parked out front. I decided to report what had just transpired. I pulled into that lot, parked beside the deputy's vehicle, and approached on foot. The deputy leaned casually against his cruiser, sipping coffee from a paper cup. Before I could finish explaining what happened, he cut me off abruptly. "Bald guy? Blue tank top?" "Yeah," I replied, caught completely off guard. "How did you—" "We've been hunting for him," the deputy said, his expression hardening instantly. "He's been causing serious problems for weeks." I told him the suspect was currently inside the store across the lot. The deputy didn't waste a second. He jumped into his cruiser and peeled out, tires screeching across the pavement. I drove home, watching that dimly lit parking lot fade in my rearview mirror. I couldn't shake how dangerously close that encounter had come to turning deadly. If I hadn't carelessly left my weapon in the back seat, if I'd reacted even 1 second slower, who knows how differently things would have ended. I never learned what happened to that terrified woman or the psychopath with the hunting knife, but that night still haunts me. Story 2. I worked as a private security contractor for several retail locations on the outskirts of Salinas, California. The area was typically peaceful, an outdoor shopping plaza surrounded by vacant fields and a few decrepit warehouses. Our duties mainly involved handling shoplifters, late-night trespassers, and occasionally patrolling the massive parking area behind the Walmart Supercenter. Nothing significant ever occurred out there, until that spring morning in 2019 to March 24th, a Sunday. My shift began at 6 a.m. The air was bitterly cold, the kind that penetrates your jacket before sunrise. I climbed into the company truck and started my routine patrol around the rear lot. The early morning sun made the asphalt glisten faintly, and seagulls circled above the dumpsters like vultures. That back section had been mostly deserted since the Christmas holidays ended, just some abandoned shopping carts and maybe 1 or 2 old vehicles that hadn't moved in months. But as I turned toward the far corner, something caught my attention. A small gray Honda Civic sat parked near the old loading dock area, half concealed behind a concrete support pillar, angled strangely between faded parking lines. I'd noticed it before, maybe once or twice over the previous few months. Initially, I assumed it belonged to an employee working double shifts, or perhaps someone sleeping in their vehicle overnight. That wasn't unusual. Walmart lots attract those types. But that particular morning, something felt deeply wrong. The car windows were completely fogged from the inside, streaked with thick dust and grime. The tires appeared deflated, nearly flat. Cobwebs stretched across the side mirror. I stopped the truck about 15 feet away and lowered my window. A faint, sour odor drifted in, subtle initially, but potent enough to make me recoil. This wasn't the typical garbage smell from the dumpsters. This was heavier, denser, more organic. I stepped out and walked slowly toward the Honda. The closer I got, the more overpowering the stench became. My stomach churned violently and my chest tightened. "Hello? Security, you okay in there?" I called out loudly. No response. No movement whatsoever. I circled to the driver's side. The windshield had accumulated a thick film of dust. The wiper blades had literally fused to the glass. That's when I saw it. faint shapes visible through the window. Something pale slumped across the front seat. I leaned closer, shielding my eyes from the sun's glare. It wasn't just something. It was someone. A woman. She sat upright, her head tilted back against the headrest, hands folded in her lap like she'd simply fallen asleep. Her face was barely distinguishable through the haze, but visible enough to see that her skin had turned an unnatural color. Grayish, dried out, mummified. I froze completely. Every sound around me, the distant traffic, the circling birds, just vanished. I stumbled backward and grabbed my radio, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "This is Unit 3. I need police at the back lot immediately. Possible deceased person inside a vehicle." Within 10 minutes, a patrol car arrived. Officers cordoned off the area with yellow tape and instructed me to wait while they confirmed my discovery. When one officer opened the driver's door, the smell hit everyone simultaneously. The kind that sears your throat and lingers even after you've walked far away. They covered their faces and muttered quietly, "Yeah, she's been here a very long time." Later, detectives arrived. I gave my statement and watched from a distance as they worked methodically around the Honda. They covered the windows with tarps and began documenting everything meticulously. Eventually, one officer approached and told me the victim's name, Lauren Cho, 22 years old, reported missing months earlier. She'd been missing since December, 3 entire months. And she'd been right there in that Walmart parking lot the whole time. They explained that her body went unnoticed because of the tinted windows, the vehicle's position, and how rarely that section of the lot was utilized. People had parked just a few spaces away from her corpse, never realizing what decomposed inside that Honda. When the coroner's team arrived, they opened the rear door to remove her remains. A small purse was found on the passenger seat, along with a water bottle and her cell phone, battery completely dead. It appeared she'd gone to sleep inside her car one night and simply never woke up. No evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, just a young woman who vanished from her family's world, sitting silently in her vehicle while months passed and people parked, shopped, and drove home just feet away from her corpse. I couldn't erase that image from my mind. The way the morning sunlight hit the windshield, the unnatural stillness of her folded hands. For weeks afterward, I avoided that section of the parking lot entirely. Even driving near it made me physically ill. The company temporarily reassigned my patrol route, but it didn't help much. Every time I spotted an old car parked alone anywhere, I'd compulsively check the plates, the windows, anything. A few months later, Walmart had the vehicle towed after the investigation concluded, but the oil stains and tire marks remained there for a long time. Sometimes I'd watch shoppers pushing their carts right past that exact spot, laughing, talking on their phones, never realizing what had decomposed there for 3 months. The story spread through the staff rapidly. Everyone suddenly started remembering things. How they'd noticed that same car during the holiday season, how it never moved, how some assumed it was simply abandoned. Even the night shift workers admitted they'd driven past it countless times without thinking twice. It wasn't their fault. Nobody expects something so final to be hiding in plain sight. After the case made local news, her family released a statement. How they'd filed a missing person report immediately, how they'd searched every city in the surrounding area. They couldn't comprehend how her vehicle had been parked there the entire time, in a location with daily security patrols, surveillance cameras, and constant foot traffic. Neither could I. That's what still haunts me most. Not just that I discovered her, but how easily we all drove past something so horrific without noticing. Every night I worked after that discovery, I found myself obsessively checking the dark corners of the lot. Not for thieves or trespassers, but for silence, for motionless cars, for forgotten stories. Because when you've witnessed what can hide in a parking lot filled with people, you realize some of the most terrifying things aren't lurking in shadows at all. They're right in front of you, and you just don't see them. Story 3. My job is the typical 9 to 5 that routinely bleeds into 9 to 7, sometimes even later. I work as a data analyst for a medium-sized logistics corporation. It's not glamorous work, but it provides stability. Our office occupies one of those sprawling, low-rise corporate complexes on the town's outskirts, surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns and an endless ocean of asphalt parking lots. During daylight hours, it's a bustling environment. After dark, it transforms into one of the most isolated, eerily quiet places imaginable. This particular evening, a Tuesday in late autumn, had stretched on endlessly. A critical report needed completion, and I was the sole remaining employee tasked with finishing it. When I finally hit send on that email, my entire body ached with exhaustion. I packed my belongings, switched off the lights, and the sudden plunge into near-total darkness was jarring. The only illumination in our entire wing came from the sickly green glow of an exit sign at the corridor's far end. The walk to the main lobby felt abnormally long, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the oppressive silence. The security guard, a friendly older gentleman named Sal, gave me his usual wave from behind his desk. "Burning the midnight oil again?" he asked, not glancing up from his crossword puzzle. "Just wrapping up some loose ends," I replied, attempting to sound more alert than I felt. The automatic glass doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and a blast of frigid, crisp air struck me. The sun had set hours earlier, leaving the sky a deep, impenetrable black. The parking lot stretched before me, a grid of faint orange pools cast by tall, humming sodium vapor lamps. Most of the lot sat empty now, creating an unsettling checkerboard pattern of scattered vehicles and vacant spaces that made everything look unfamiliar and vaguely threatening. That's when the first minor frustration hit me. I couldn't remember where I'd parked. I typically park in Section C, but that morning it had been completely full, forcing me somewhere into Section D, or possibly E. I clicked the unlock button on my key fob, hoping to spot the friendly flash of my car's headlights. Nothing happened. I was too far away. So I began walking, my dress shoes crunching softly against the cold asphalt. Row after row I scanned the remaining vehicles. A silver sedan here, a black SUV there, a red hatchback. None of them was my simple dark blue four-door. The orange lamps cast long, grotesquely distorted shadows that seemed to shift and writhe at the periphery of my vision. A sudden gust of wind rustled the dry leaves piled against a concrete divider, and the sound made me physically jump. I felt a creeping unease, that primal instinct you experience when you suddenly realize you're completely alone in a vast, dark space. I told myself I was merely exhausted, that my imagination was spiraling. I pressed my fob button again. This time, I heard a faint chirp and spotted a brief flash of lights 2 rows over. Roughly 50 yards down the lot, relief flooded through me. Finally, I quickened my pace, bag slung over my shoulder, mind already focused on the drive home, a hot shower, my bed. I reached my vehicle, fumbling in my pocket for the key. My hand closed around the door handle, the cold metal a familiar comfort. But just as my thumb pressed the unlock button, I froze. I don't know why. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a sight. It was pure instinct. A sudden, overwhelming, and completely illogical feeling that screamed at me not to enter that car. It commanded me to straighten up and turn around immediately. My rational mind insisted I was being ridiculous, that I was exhausted and letting the creepy emptiness affect me. But the sensation was so overpowering that I obeyed without conscious thought. I released the handle, straightened my spine, and slowly turned around. He was right there, no more than 6 inches from my face. My breath caught in my throat, a strangled gasp that produced no sound. He stood so close I could feel faint warmth radiating from his body. He was turning toward me at the exact same moment I turned toward him, as if we were partners in some grotesque, choreographed dance. For a split second that felt like an eternity, we were perfectly face to face, eye to eye. My mind went completely blank with pure, undiluted shock. He hadn't been there 1 second ago. I would have seen him. I would have heard footsteps, breathing, something. There had been no sound of approaching footsteps, no crunch of gravel. He was just there. His eyes were wide, dark, and utterly vacant. He wasn't looking at me so much as through me, like I was transparent. He was average height, with a thin, gaunt face and dark, disheveled hair. He wore a plain gray hoodie, hands buried in the pockets. He wasn't menacing in the theatrical way a movie villain might be. He was terrifying because he was so ordinary, yet his presence felt so fundamentally wrong. His posture wasn't that of someone casually walking to their own vehicle. It was predatory. It was the stance of something that had been waiting. Hunting. As my fear-heightened senses kicked into overdrive, I started noticing more horrifying details. The faint, sour stench of unwashed clothes. The way his jaw was clenched tight. The complete absence of normal human expression. Our eyes locked, and in that moment, I felt a shift. It was like he was genuinely surprised that I had detected him, that I had turned around. His empty expression flickered briefly, replaced by something I can only describe as confusion, and then pure annoyance, as if my noticing him had completely ruined whatever he'd been planning. He abruptly broke eye contact, turned sharply to his left, and walked away without uttering a single word. He didn't run. He simply walked at a steady, deliberate pace into the darkness, vanishing behind a row of parked cars. I stood there frozen, my heart hammering against my ribcage so violently I thought I might actually pass out. I didn't get in my car. I ran. I sprinted back toward the office building, not daring to glance behind me even once. I burst through the automatic doors, startling Sal so badly he nearly spilled his entire cup of coffee. I was gasping for air, unable to form coherent words, and he just stared at me with wide, deeply concerned eyes. The weeks that followed were saturated with low-grade, persistent paranoia. I started leaving work strictly at 5 o'clock, always walking out with a coworker. I described the man to Sal, who promised to watch for him. I tried desperately to forget it, to rationalize what happened. Maybe he was just some weirdo. Maybe he was as startled as I was. But I couldn't shake the memory of those dead eyes, that impossible closeness, the absolute certainty that if I hadn't turned around at that exact moment, I would have been inside that car with him. About a month later, I was forced to stay late again. A server had crashed catastrophically, and it became an all-hands situation. By the time I left, it was almost 9 p.m. I walked out with 2 IT department colleagues. We walked together until we reached the edge of Section B, where they climbed into their vehicle. "You sure you're okay from here?" one of them asked through their open window. "Yeah, I'm just over in Section D," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "I'll be fine." As they drove away, the familiar oppressive silence of the parking lot enveloped me like a suffocating blanket. I clutched my keys in my fist like a weapon and started walking toward my car. This time I spotted my vehicle from a distance, and someone was standing directly beside the driver's side door. It was him, the exact same gray hoodie, the same thin frame. His back was to me, and he was fiddling with the door handle, his arm moving in a rhythmic, jerking motion. He was actively trying to break into my car. This time there was no shock, only a cold, sickening wave of confirmation washing over me. He hadn't been some random weirdo that first night. He had been waiting for me specifically. He knew my car. He'd been watching me, studying my patterns. I must have made some small sound, a gasp, a shuffle, because he suddenly froze completely. He slowly turned his head, and his eyes found me across 50 feet of empty asphalt. The expression on his face wasn't fear of being caught. It was pure, unfiltered rage. He released the door handle. His hand plunged into his hoodie pocket. He pulled out a knife. It wasn't particularly large, but the way that orange lamplight glinted off the blade made my blood turn to ice in my veins. And then he ran. He sprinted directly at me, knife held low at his side in a practiced grip. I didn't hesitate. I dropped my bag and ran for my life, screaming at the absolute top of my lungs. I didn't run back toward the office. I ran toward the main road, toward the entrance to the corporate park. My lungs burned agonizingly. His footsteps sounded terrifyingly close behind me, getting closer with each second. It was pure, dumb luck. As I stumbled out of the parking lot and onto the access road, a pair of headlights swept across me, a police car on routine patrol. I waved my arms frantically, still screaming, and the cruiser screeched to a halt. 2 officers jumped out, expressions immediately deadly serious. I pointed back into the parking lot, gasping desperately for air. A man with a knife was trying to break into my car. One officer stayed with me while the other drew his service weapon and cautiously advanced into the lot. But the man was gone. He had vanished back into whatever shadows had spawned him. They took my detailed statement. They searched the entire parking lot methodically. They reviewed security camera footage, but it was grainy and inconclusive. They could see a figure in a hoodie, but his face was never clear enough to identify. They promised to increase patrols in the area and to contact me if they found anything. I never received an update. They never found him. I still don't know who he was, what he wanted, or why he targeted me specifically. But I know with absolute certainty that if I hadn't turned around that first night, if I had simply gotten into my car like normal, you wouldn't be reading this story right now.